Hello and welcome back to another episode of the On the Sideline podcast. And I am joined by a man who can apparently predict the future. Kyle Stradamus himself nailed the Jamal Adams pick. Kyle, how are you doing?
Uh, Not too bad. Moving's probably the worst thing on the planet, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm here now. I'm settled. I felt so passionately about Dak Prescott having to get paid that I moved out here to Dallas to let everybody know how I feel about it. So here we are, all settled and moved in, ready to go. And yes, I am 100% on my prediction so far in 2020 with Jamal Adams to Seattle.
Yes. Great job by you. And you were on it. There was no point where you were even like thinking maybe someone else was going to get Jamal Adams. It was like every time Jamal Adams brought up, you were talking about Seattle. Absolutely nailed it. Before we get too much further in this show, we're going to be going in depth about the NFC South, which explains my outfit if you're watching the video. And we're also going to touch on some other things. We'll touch on Jamal Adams, maybe touch on baseball a little bit right at the beginning. If that's not what you're interested in, the timestamps are in the comments below. Just click on that if you only want to see maybe one team get talked about. But yeah, let's just jump into it. Let's talk about Jamal Adams. What was your initial thoughts when you saw that this was happening?
Well, like I said, I mean, the reason why I said it at the beginning because I thought it was a perfect fit for player and team. They had not that McDougal was bad, but the difference between McDougal at strong safety and Jamal Adams at strong safety is a huge difference, especially at a team like Seattle and the defense they that relies a lot on what their secondary can do. That's a definitive upgrade. Now, the questions that you have for Seattle is you're trading 2 first-round picks and a starting caliber player. He's probably a mid to lower tier starting caliber safety. He's still a starting caliber safety and 2 first-round picks for a defensive player that's not a pass rusher or a cornerback, which are usually regarded as the 2 premium positions on the defensive side of the ball. Now, I think Adams as a safety, given his age and his skill set already and what he can do, playing on multiple areas around the field besides just being he's not just a Cam Chancellor, as everyone's ready to call it the new Legion of Boom, and he's just going to fill in that role. He's not just necessarily Cam Chancellor because he could do so much more than what Cam did on that defense, and Cam was a great defender. So I think it makes it worthwhile, the value that you're giving up for him. But I do think that this is the best trade the Jets could have got, 2 first-round picks and a pretty good safety in return.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think my biggest surprise was more so just how much New York was able to get. I think this is a good trade for both sides. That's where I fall on this. You're nodding your head. I'm assuming you agree. I just think that for New York, I mean, obviously it probably sucks for Jets fans to lose what was probably one of your favorite players, but to get 2 first-round picks back, they're going to be later first-round picks probably, but still, you're getting a ton of value back for Adams, and along with a safety that should be able to fill his role. And I also just think that for Seattle, I mean, just thinking about you have Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Jamal Adams, and then their first round rookie Jordan Brooks filling up that 5 to 15 yard down the field area. I mean, that's going to be very difficult to do much with. You can't really run against them, and you can't really throw against them. They have one of the best secondaries in the league. I actually adjusted their ranking, their score. They got a 6.9. I adjusted it to 7.1. I gave their secondary a 10 because of this trade. Didn't change anything, but it's definitely put them as a big. I think they're legitimately a Super Bowl contender now, and now to have arguably the best secondary in football. Although I would probably still say Baltimore is number 1.
Yeah, I mean, those 2, New England's also up there, given everybody they have on their roster. I think that the big thing with Seattle, I mean, I think everyone's ready to call this the new Legion of Boom. I am hesitant to call it that because I think what Seattle did in that cover 3 scheme for that many years, Richard Sherman was obviously great, and that was a big part of it too. But I think it was so reliant on Earl Thomas being, a generational safety talent that can cover the entire center field of a defense. And while I think Quandre Diggs is good, I don't think he's Earl Thomas generational talent good when Earl Thomas was healthy. So I'm not necessarily ready to say that it's going to be that good of a defense, but you mentioned the 3 linebackers they have and Adams playing up in that kind of strong safety role. That's probably the most athletic linebacking safety core in the league. It's going to be impossible to get any flat routes on this team because those guys are just going to cover so much ground, I think. And running the ball, like you said, is going to be next to impossible as well. So I give them credit for that. I'm not ready to call it the new Legion of Boom, but I think it's going to be a very good secondary this next season. I already had Seattle as one of my Super Bowl contenders, and this just solidifies it for me. Adams is a great fit for that, what they're going to do, and I think it's going to be a good team.
Yeah. I think that 49ers probably are still the betting favorites, but the gap has definitely closed a lot, and you could make a strong argument Seattle is now the favorites. And let's move on a little bit. Hopefully this trade for the Seahawks works out better than the Red Sox first couple of games have gone so far this season, losing the opening series to Baltimore. I mean, Baltimore's tough. You can't expect to be winning all those games, right?
Oh, God. Gee, I was watching that team the first day. And opening day, I'm like, Jose Iglesias couldn't make our team like 5 years ago. And now all of a sudden he's Baltimore's number 3 hitter.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm thinking the Pawtucket Red Sox could put up a better fight right now than the Baltimore Orioles. But at the same time, 3 games in, I can already tell this pitching staff for the Red Sox is going to be the death of me. We have Nathan Eovaldi is currently our ace because Eduardo Rodriguez is having heart problems based on his complications from COVID-19. Obviously, I hope he's healthy, and obviously that's pretty scary. But Eovaldi's solid, but obviously, he's had one good year his entire career, and then for the most part, he either hasn't stayed healthy or hasn't been very good. And now he's our ace. And Ryan Weber, I believe it was, started today. This is going to be a rough Red Sox season, I think. I think a lot of the season, as it's kind of like a 60-game sprint, as they call it, the cliche line everyone's using, the 60-game sprint to the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I think the one thing with this 60-game thing is that it's going to be a lot like the playoffs where every game pitching matters. You can't have bad pitching in a lot of these games. And that's where the Red Sox bullpen starters are just their weakest. I like Workman in the bullpen, but as the most part, I just hate the rest of this pitching staff. And it's not really, the whole Mookie Betts trade, it's not really going to matter how many runs they score because they can't get anybody out. And if we're giving up 7 runs to the Orioles in 2 games, back-to-back games or whatever it is, then we're going to struggle throughout the season, especially with, Toronto and the bats they have in their lineup, Tampa Bay and the offense they have in their lineup. And then, of course, there's the Yankees who can hit pretty well as well. That's going to be tough to, we're playing, 30 games against those 3 teams, and we have the worst pitching staff in the league. So that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Also, I should mention, for anyone who's listening, be on the lookout. In about a week from now, Kyle will be starting to do some baseball content, some video content on this show or on this channel. So that should be fun. Be on the lookout for that. And I wanted to shift a little bit and talk about maybe a little bit more generalities. So I was watching the Rays game today. They came back. They were down 4-0. Came back to tie it in the 9th. Won it in the 10th. And I have to say, I am totally on board with this new extra innings rule. I love the run in extra innings. Player starts on second with nobody out. I think this is a great rule, and I'm on board. What are your thoughts of this rule?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think that anything that can help the pace of the game, people are going to say it's quirky, all that kind of stuff, but anything that makes the game move a little faster and make it a little more entertaining for people, who really cares at this point? They're already increasing the playoffs again, right after increasing the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So now we're at 16 teams. Let's just, this is going to be a quirky season, which makes it, I think, okay to try different things. Baseball has had a lot of things on the table that they wanted to try differently to try and increase the pace, make the game more entertaining for fans. And now you're forcing all the fans to sit at home. So any way to try and make it as entertaining as possible for them sitting at home watching these games, you might as well try and do it. And I think that this is a great step forward for baseball and what they're trying to do in that regard. I'm all for the runner on second. I'm all for being quirky with it.
Yeah, I love it. It's like I feel like it's like the shootout, but unlike the shootout, where I do think the shootout in NHL is more exciting, but it's also like not hockey. I feel like this is like adding like the element of like a shootout where it's more exciting, but also it's still baseball. It's still a thing that happens in baseball all the time. So it's adding both. It creates so many fun situations. I get why the purists don't like it, but at the end of the day, I think it's a good move. One more thing I want to talk about before we get into the previews is that I just find the idea that we have a team called the Washington Football Team to be the funniest thing on earth. They couldn't come up with a name, so they're just going with the football team. I want Washington to go all the way. Go Washington baseball team, Washington hockey team. Just be as generic as possible.
Well, the best joke for me was that they were going to change their name to the DC Redskins. I mean, I'm all for changing the name. I think people are getting way too worked up into, oh, well, the name is the allegiance factor. Guess what? There's so many teams in Washington. Guess what? The Nationals were not the Nationals their entire time. The Washington Wizards changed their name recently. And, nobody's really been upset about it. I think that it is a little ridiculous to say that you can't have 10 smart people sit in a room and come up with a team name and a logo in 3 months. But if this is what we're doing with for the year, I think it's going to be kind of cool to get some of that memorabilia, though, and have that as kind of a collector's item to say Washington Football Team. I think that would be interesting.
People will be like, wow, what's that from, 1932? Nope, that was 2020. That's when we had that. No, I think every team should change their name like every 10 years. I think it's fun. Who cares? It's a name. I love rebranding and stuff like that. I think it's fun. But I'm weird. So anyways, let's just get into the breakdown finally. So here's how it works. If you haven't seen any of our other previews, the way that this works is that Kyle is going to rank the teams he thinks is going to finish in the division last to first. I then have a 1 to 10 scale on each position grouping, which also gives them a final grade for offense, defense, and overall. I also rank the coach from 1 to 10. And from that, I guess I don't have to explain anymore. Kyle, what team do you think is going to finish last in the NFC South? And if you say Buccaneers, I will leave the stream.
Well, I'm not going to say the Buccaneers, so lucky you. Quick thing also that I've been starting everything off with, I'm ranking all the divisions.
All right.
To recap some of them, I had the NFC East as the worst division in football. I had the NFC North as the 4th best division in football. It's actually a 3-way tie from 3rd through 5, but I ranked them 4th based on a couple tiebreakers that I made up in my head. I had the NFC West. Yes, I had the NFC West as the best division in football by a significant margin, and that's because there's really no bad teams in there, plus 2 Super Bowl contenders. And then this one, the NFC South, I have as the 2nd best division in football, firmly entrenched in there. And that's because, once again, I have 8 Super Bowl contenders on my list, and 2 of them, like the NFC West, are also in the NFC South for me. And then the one thing that does knock down the NFC South a little bit is that I don't have any other playoff teams really listed. And then I have 1 first-round pick potential team, and that's the Carolina Panthers, who I'm coming in at number 4. I do think I've mentioned it multiple times on this podcast. I think that this is a definitive rebuilding year for the Panthers. I like a lot of the pieces they have on defense, but they're really young and really inexperienced. I really like Matt Rule on that side. I think he's going to have them well disciplined, but I think that this is a 2-3 year project. And I don't really like who they brought in on offense besides Christian McCaffrey, who they already had, who's probably the best running back in football, but I had them at 4th. And I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in football this next year as they're building forward. I like what they have, but it's going to be a project.
Yeah, they remind me a bit of someone in the comments said that the Seattle Seahawks offensive line is more patchy than my mustache, which was funny but mean. But I feel like if anything is more patchy than my mustache, it is the Carolina Panthers, this roster as a whole. They have some pieces for sure, but they just have a ton of holes. And let's just get into it. We'll start at the top with coaching. Matt Rule, in his first year, he gets a 3. He fell down. Also, I should mention, if you haven't seen one of these already, the rankings that the coaches and quarterbacks get are directly taken from where they ended up on my top on our list that we did. So Rule gets a 3 for head coach, and Bridgewater is going to get a 2. For Rule, the main reason he falls just because he's young. First year head coaches tend to be a struggle. Bridgewater's, I don't think he's a mess, but he's not necessarily someone I think you want as a starting quarterback unless it's like a team is loaded around him. That is not the case. So a 5 out of 20 combined for the 2 most important slots here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing. Like, Teddy might even be a 1 for me. Teddy Two Gloves, I think he looked good in parts last year, and that was a lot because I think a lot of quarterbacks can look good with Sean Payton, and I think that had a huge influence on it. Obviously, 68% completion percentage was really good, but still, his last full season was 3 years ago. And in that season, he had good moments, and it was his second year of his NFL career, but he still only had 14 touchdowns to 9 picks. I don't know what his ceiling is anymore. I even felt like when he was looking good his first couple of years, his ceiling wasn't going to be very high to begin with. And now after the injuries and all of that, I'm not really sure what he's going to be able to do with this team. I don't think he has the ceiling of a guy like Cam. And I felt like this team was really quick to get rid of a guy like Kyle Allen, who I thought, he didn't wow me in any ways, but at least was solid. And, that's pretty much what the best I could say for Bridgewater is that he's solid. I didn't really understand giving up on the young guy so quickly, but if this is the direction you want to go with Bridgewater, I don't know how long he'll be the starting quarterback for this team, but I guess he's okay.
Yeah. Only I think at best a marginal upgrade from Kyle Allen. But the bright side is they're only spending $30 million to get that slight upgrade. So I just went back and checked. The reason why he got the 2 was because Nick Foles, Tyrod Taylor, and Haskins all finished below him. Bottom 3 get 1s. So he was 4th worst. So the worst number 2 on the board. But listen. I've been a big fan of Teddy Bridgewater, despite the fact that he's been playing in my division for a couple of years now and is continuing to do that. Wish him nothing but the best. But we'll move on to the offensive line. They have Matt Paradis, he was great with Denver, but has not necessarily been a mess with Carolina, but not worth his $9 million contract. You also have for guards Dennis Daly, who he was a 6th-round pick, who was a rookie last year. He showed some promise. They also got John Miller, who was maybe the best thing about Cincinnati's line last year, which isn't saying much, admittedly. And also, no, he played with Teddy Bridgewater in college. You have to wonder if that will help. Moving on to tackles, you have Taylor Martin, who is not remarkable, but still very good. And then you have Russell Okung, who is, he's been a very good tackle for quite some time with the Chargers, but he's also 32 and coming off of a season he missed most of due to injury. So you have some worries there. I don't think their line is a complete mess. I think that they have a lot of guys who should be okay, but I think this is the below average line. I'm giving it a 4.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of just feels mid-tier to me. Every one of these guys, I was like, oh, okay, they're fine. Okun's obviously the big one. If he can stay healthy, that's a big get, especially, given his age, you wonder how much he has left in the tank. But he's always been a pretty solid offensive tackle, especially pass blocking, which is something they're definitely going to need help in. So I like the trade when they traded Turner for him overall, but we'll see how much he has left in the tank coming off the injury.
Yeah, and from there we'll double up here with the wide receivers and backs, partially because I feel like McCaffrey kind of does both. We'll start with the backs. Christian McCaffrey, I'm giving the halfbacks a 9 simply because as great as McCaffrey is, he's probably the best running back in football. I just don't know who else they really have. It looks like Reggie Bonifan, who I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure because he's an undrafted free agent with close to no playing time to his name. He seems to be their second string. I'm going to give them a 9 instead of a 10 just because of the backup situation. For wide receivers, I think the wide receivers are a bit underrated. Actually, I like DJ Moore. They have Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel. I feel like they have 3 number 2 guys. And so also Seth Roberts, who should be a solid 4. I'm giving them a 6. I don't think it's anything crazy. I think they could really benefit from a true number 1 guy. Maybe Moore can take that next step. But, these are probably the 2 best things maybe about the Panthers overall, but, the weapons that they have.
Yeah, I mean, McCaffrey's a 10 for me. He's just you said he might be. I think you're being a little more political about it. I think he's the best running back in football because of everything he can do. I mean, the one worry you have about him is how many touches he gets catching and running. Is there going to be that inevitable injury potentially for him? That could be one thing. But I still think he's the best running back in football because he can do just about everything. I really like DJ Moore, too. I think he's really solid. He's got to increase the touchdowns a little bit to hit that kind of number 1 level higher tier. But I think he's good nonetheless. And I thought Samuel was good last year. Robbie Anderson, I feel like, has always kind of been a number 3 guy who was stuck in a number 1 role these last couple of years. So I think that's going to be a good fit for him. So I think there's some, like you said, there is some dynamic positions at this receiver. but there's no game changer to me really at that wide receiver position besides McCaffrey and what he's able to do catching the ball out of the backfield, which probably opens up for a lot of these wide receivers anyways. So
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I say might be for McCaffrey is because it depends on what you value. If you're someone who wants just a straight up, downhill running back, then Henry might be more your speed. If I was a head coach, I would want McCaffrey more than anybody. But depending on the system, you could argue someone else would be there. So I'd say might. But yeah, good stuff there. We'll go on to tight ends. They obviously they lost Greg Olsen. You've seen Ian Thomas, who has kind of been trapped behind Olsen, has shown some flashes. We'll have to see how he does. Looks like he's going to be a number one guy. You also have Chris Manhertz, who neither one of them has had significant playing time, really. It's a big wild card, and it gets a 3 for me. So that's going to bring their offense to a total of a 4.8, which is the third worst in the NFC, according to these rankings.
Yeah, it's crazy that, just in a few years, this went from Cam Newton and kind of like that big power running team with guys like, his numbers never really wowed me, but I always kind of like Ed Dickson. And then obviously you had Greg Olsen. It kind of went to that big power running team and used the tight ends to essentially no tight ends, some skilled receivers, and an athletic running back. It's crazy how this offense has changed in just a few short years. And obviously Cam's injuries have played into that. But yeah, I mean, I think that they have the skill position talent. It's just that their line A has to hold up for Bridgewater, and then Bridgewater has to be able to get the guys the ball. And he has never been one to throw the ball much downfield. So we'll see what happens. They got to be able to take the top off of defense once in a while.
Yeah, agreed. Very interesting stuff. Interesting with the Panthers. We'll see what they do. I think they could be a fun team, even if they might not be great. We'll move on to the defense. We'll go to start off with edge rushers. They have Brian Burns, who was really underrated last year. I think because there were so many good edge rushers that were rookies last year, he kind of got underlooked, or overlooked. He is very good. You also they drafted Yetur Gross-Matos with the 38th overall pick, and they acquired Stephen Weatherly from Minnesota, who is a really good motor guy, should be a good number 3. I think we'll see how these young players develop, but I'm going to give them a 7 for now, and it could easily end up being a 10 by the end of this season. And also for the interior defensive line, they have Kawan Short, who is great, did miss last season to injury. But you also have Derek Brown, who they just drafted. We'll see how he develops right away because, again, I'm just ranking for this year. Sometimes interior defensive linemen take time to develop. But this also gets a 7 for both the edge and the interior D-line.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was even higher on Brown than you were in the draft, if I remember correctly. I really like Brown, but I think this is kind of going to be the theme for this defense is because if I remember correctly, they drafted all defense in the draft. And it's just going to be young guys at every position. And a lot of it's going to be, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I think Burns overall was probably the third best pass rusher among rookies last year. Obviously, he's sitting behind guys like Josh Allen and Nick Bosa, which is pretty good company to be in. But I thought he was really good last year. I think the big thing that's going to be with him is that a lot of his production came in the first half of the season. If he can get through that rookie wall and have better second half of the season, be a little more consistent, his numbers are always going to go up and he's going to look a lot better. I really like Gross-Matos. Like I said, I really like Derek Brown. Short back healthy is going to be a big thing. I like this defensive line. It's just I think it's going to be a couple of years before it's really at its peak.
Yeah, I agree. Also, the Raiders fans will be coming after you for not including Max Crosby in that list. But Raiders fans coming after you is not something you're unused to. So I think you'll be all right. And from that, we can move on to linebackers here. Linebackers that aren't edge rushers. So in this case, just linebackers. I believe they're running 4-3. It's going to be Shaq Thompson, who is good. He's kind of not quite a Pro Bowl, but like sort of the next level below. Very good. Tahir Whitehead, who is a really good run-stopping linebacker. You just never want to see him in coverage. Not a very good coverage linebacker. You also have Jermaine Carter, another guy who has shown flashes, but appears to be more really just a depth guy than anything. I think this is probably going to be a lower linebacking core if it wasn't for Thompson, but Thompson's going to bring it up to a 5 for me. I think he brings it up to mediocre. I could probably be talked into a 4, but I'm going to go a 5.
Yeah, I mean, he had his best year of his career last year, and I think that was a big thing because we've all seen the athletic ability with Thompson and how good he can be, and I think we started to see how good he actually can be. And now at 26, I think he's hitting his prime. I think he is going to get a few Pro Bowl seasons under his belt over these next couple of years. But yeah, you question the players he has around him at that linebacking position. Obviously, he's going to do a lot of the coverage because he is pretty athletic. But having the guys around him that aren't good in coverage is going to be a problem.
Yeah, agreed. And then we'll get on to the worst part about this team, in my opinion, the secondary. It looks like there's a real chance that Eli Apple could end up being the number one corner on this team, which would just be not ideal. I don't think Eli Apple did show a little bit as a number 3 corner with New Orleans, but number 1 would not be what I want from him. They also have Deontay Johnson, who is kind of the guy where when he's good, he's great, but the problem is he's not good very often. They also have drafted a corner in the 4th round, Troy Pride. Perhaps he could do something, but again, rookie corners, rookie secondary players in general are big question marks their rookie season. For safeties, they have Trey Boston, who is he's the bright spot of this secondary. But other than that, you have Justin Burris, who again, he's serviceable, but he's not going to make up for the badness going on the sides. I don't think. You also have they drafted a couple more safeties as well, one in the 2nd, one in the 5th. I'm giving the secondary a 1 because I hate their cornerback position, and I think it's going to be a mess. Even though I don't think their safeties are that bad, I think that this is going to be a very easy team to pass on, which is not great considering the fact that they have 2 or maybe 3 Hall of Famers playing in their division at quarterback position.
Yeah, this is definitely, the crazy thing is between their linebackers where they have 2 that aren't very good in coverage and their secondary who isn't very good in coverage either besides Boston. That's a huge problem when you're playing Tom Brady and Drew Brees 4 times a year and Matt Ryan. So you include all those guys 6 times a year. That's definitely a problem. This is another one where it's like I like Jeremy Chin. I think he stood out a lot of the combine stuff that he had. He's very athletic. I think he's going to be a good safety going forward, but it's probably going to be a year. I like Troy Pride at Notre Dame. I really liked him. He's a little undersized. He's going to be a slot corner, I think, going forward. But another one where he's also going to be young and he's got to build into that role, which means you're kind of stuck, like you said, with Eli Apple overplaying for a position that he probably shouldn't be playing in as that number 1 guy. He's always just kind of fine, solid, I guess. But even then, you're not asking him to be a shutdown guy by any means. That's going to be a problem. And, they're also playing, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, and, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. It's not just the quarterbacks in this position, in this division. It's the wide receivers also. This is a huge problem to have when you're this bad at this position against these 3 teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much everyone's list of top 10 wide receivers in their top 5, 3 of them are in this division. So it's a rough spot for them. I think this is probably going to be a rebuilding year for Carolina. Their defense gets a 5.0. Total is 4.7, and that brings them their overall is going to be here. Give me 1 second. I have it here. They are the 2nd worst team in the NFC. The only team worse than them was the Washington football team, got a 4.6. So looks like this is going to be a rebuilding year for Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said, I think that one of these things, the Panthers fans, I think, are just going to have to understand that this is going to be a process. I like I said multiple times, I really like Matt Rule, and especially what he can do in player development because he did it at Temple at a high level. He did it at Baylor at a high level, especially on that defensive side. It's just going to be patient because I don't think this team's going to be good for the next couple of years unless they get a game-changing quarterback in the draft one of this next year. I just don't think this team's going to be very good. There's a lot of holes on this team, and there's a lot of revamping this roster, I think, overall. So I think it's going to be a project. I think Panthers fans just have to be patient with it.
Yes. I agree. I agree with everything you just said. And from that, we can move on to the number 3 team in this division. Why do you have Atlanta here?
Yeah, I mean, so I originally, when I was making my rankings, had this team, I had this division ranked a little higher, even higher up in that number 2 ranking They still didn't hit the NFC West, but that's because I had Atlanta in the playoff spot. But then I kept looking at this roster and is like, is this really going to be one of the best 8 teams in football? I don't think this is. Like, I just keep looking at this roster, and there's a lot of things that I say like, well, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. I don't like this team very much. I think there's too many holes on this roster to make it a playoff team. But when you have guys like Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, it's still going to win 6 or 7 games and be solid. Not to mention, I don't think Dan Quinn's a very good coach. I don't think, we've beaten that multiple times. I don't think he should have came back this last season or going into this season. I think he should have been fired. And now you have a defensive coach who seemingly can't coach defense because the defense isn't ever very good. And then you have an offense that has 2 good offensive linemen, but the rest of it's kind of meh, and they can't keep Matt Ryan on his feet very often. And they're banking on a running back who can't stay healthy ever to be the guy with not really much help behind him, and that turns a backup running back. So they were number 3 for me regardless, but I have them a little lower. I don't have them as a potential playoff team. I just think there's too many holes with the Atlanta Falcons roster.
Yeah, well, let's just get into it then. For the coach, I'm giving Dan Quinn 2. For quarterback, Matt Ryan gets he's the opposite on the list, gets a 9. We've talked about pretty much about both of them to death. Matt Ryan, I think is better than you do. Dan Quinn, I think we're both in agreement. Probably shouldn't have stayed. I actually think Dan Quinn might be a better coach if he goes somewhere else, but I think his time in Atlanta has expired. And we don't have to go on that too much. Let's move on to the offensive line. You have Alex Mack, who we all know he can be very good. Looks like one of their guards might end up being their rookie 3rd-round pick, Matt Hennessy. They also have Chris Lindstrom, who they drafted with the 1st-round pick last year, but he missed most of the season due to injuries. So hopefully for them, he can end up being the guard they drafted him to be. They also have Jake Matthews, who I think is very good as well. And then Caleb McGarry, who was another 1st-round pick last year, but he hasn't looked great. He ended up giving up a leading 13 sacks last year. Their offensive line, I actually think their offensive line is a bit underrated. I think that while I do agree that, having a rookie as a guard, it's a bit of a question mark. And, McGarry wasn't great his rookie season, but if he can just fix his problems and be the player that they want him to be, that they drafted him to be, I'm not willing to write him off as a bust just yet. I think that Lindstrom will be good if he stays healthy. I think this can be a good offensive line. I'm giving them a 7.
Well, the biggest problem that they've had is that Matt Ryan's been sacked on offense. Matt Ryan's been sacked 90 times in the past 2 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that has to do with, outside of Matthews and Mack, for the last couple seasons, the guys haven't held their weight next to them. Obviously, those 2 are really great talents. And, like you said, some of these other guys are very young, so they can get better. And I believe that eventually they will get better. But the question is, when are they going to get better? Because they can't have another season where Matt Ryan's going down 40 times. That's just not going to be a recipe for success for this offense.
No, yeah, I agree. But I think that only one of the guys I'm talking about is someone who has to get better, in my opinion. Lindstrom, he looked fine when he was playing. He just didn't play much because he got injured. You also have a rookie. Again, who knows? It's a wild card. I get it. And again, you could probably talk me into maybe a bit of a lower score, but I think this offensive line is going to be good. I think that, they have pieces that can actually go out and, in the running game, go out and make blocks, not just do their job. I think that this offensive line can be better than people realize.
Yeah, we'll see how this team develops. Obviously, Hennessy is going to be a big thing, too, on that guard spot as a rookie. That's a big spot to put him in, but he's protected by 2 of the best offensive linemen at their positions, with Mack, who's obviously been one of the best centers for the last 3 or 4 years, and then Matthews, who's always been good at that left tackle position. I do think that they'll be fine, but that's something that I want to see first before I'm ready to grade them higher, because I want to make sure that, they're keeping Ryan on their feet before I'm ready to say this is going to be a good offensive line.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not going to argue with that. And we'll move on to the rest of this offense. We'll start with the halfbacks or backs in general. Todd Gurley, obviously the biggest name. We'll have to see what happens. And their backup seems to be Ito Smith, who has had a little bit of playing time. He's averaged 3.8 yards per carry over his career. Nothing special. There is that 5% chance that Gurley is able to, pull an Adrian Peterson and come back from brutal injury and still be effective. It's a little different because different injuries, but I'm going to give them a 3 just because I think that there is that chance. Also, I'll throw on the wide receiving group here. It gets a 10. Julio Jones, great. Calvin Ridley, very good number 2 guy. I think Russell Gage is a good number 3 guy. And, they even have Laquan Treadwell. Maybe they can figure out a way to, get him to live up to his potential. I think it's hard to poke too many holes in the receiving core. That gets a 10. Running backs gets a 3. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is one thing that kind of scares me is that they're all in on Todd Gurley, which, I understand that he's a really good talent. I'm not going to question his talent. But, even when, he played 15 games last year, which, obviously he was healthy enough to play the games, but his carries didn't go down that much. He's still got a ton of carries for a guy who has chronic hip, knee problems, whatever it is that is wrong with his, body that continually has been breaking down since his rookie season. So how much are you banking on this guy to be your guy throughout the entire season? And, the numbers for Ito Smith speak for themselves that he's not going to be able to be that backup guy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Also worth mentioning they have Hayden Hurst. He gets a 7 for tight ends. I'm just going to throw that on because not too much to talk about there. But I think that this is going to be a team that, brought that up because I want to talk about how I think this is going to be a team that's going to try to throw the ball a lot. I think that's the idea, and not exactly expert analysis there by me. I think that's kind of obvious. They're not going to be trying to, be a running game. They're going to try to use Gurley to a small degree. I don't think it's going to work out. I don't think it's a great strategy. But at the same time, I do think this is a talented offense. I think that the running game could be a problem. But if the offensive line can run block for them, like I actually think they might be able to, they might be able to have just a consistent enough running game that they're throwing, when they throw the ball, they can be effective. Their offense as a whole gets a pretty good score of 7.2.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to this, too, is that there's never been a question about their offense. There's never been a question about the skill position guys. On paper, the Falcons always look like a team that's going to make the playoffs or be a wild card team potentially. The issue is on the other side of the ball for me. And also, once again, with the offensive line, you think they can get better. I want to see it first. Can they keep Matt Ryan on their feet enough to give it to the guys like Jones and like Ridley down the field? And really randomly, too, I forgot Laquan Treadwell was still in the league. Nice to see him get another shot in Atlanta. So we'll see what happens with that. Maybe he finds some touch as their number 4th guy. And, this team has a ton of skill. They brought in Hayden Hurst, too, to be that tight end. This team has a ton of skill. But, guys like Gurley have to stay healthy. The offensive line has to play better. They have to keep Ryan on his feet. And then we'll see what happens. I mean, I think this offense is always going to be very good, but they have to keep up with their defense, which is not very good.
Yeah, and let's just get into the defense. So we'll start things off with something that I think is the best part about their defense, their interior defensive line. You have Grady Jarrett, very underrated player. Also Tyler Davidson, who was a really good run stopper. And then you have Alan Bailey, who's a 33-year-old vet from Kansas City. Fits better in a 3-4. Looks like they're going to go 4-3, but should still be a solid contributor as that number 3 guy in the 4-3. As the backup. And then for edge, you have Takarius McKinley, who is a first rounder who has not lived up to the hype. He really fails to set the edge. He goes for a sack every time around and isn't good enough to even do it. He has like the D Ford strategy, but unlike D Ford, he can't consistently get sacks. He's not a disaster again, but he's just, he has problems. And then Dante Fowler Jr., who I think is pretty good, coming off a career high 11.5 sacks. I think he can be a 10 sack guy. But I'm giving the edge rushers a 4. So 10 for interior D-line, but 4 for edge rushers, which gives them 14 out of 20 overall for the D-line.
Yeah, I think this interior, Grady Jarrett, when he's at his best, is really, it seems like he's almost impossible to block at times. He is a menace in the middle of that defense at the defensive tackle position. Edge rusher is obviously where there's a problem. Obviously, Fowler, let's see if he can have it another year like that again when he doesn't have guys on his defensive line like Donald and, some of the talented players on that Rams defense. He's coming to an Atlanta team where he is going to be the guy on the pass rushing in terms of pass rushing, and he's going to have all the attention. So let's see if he can have another year where he's getting a 12-sack season. I think overall, I think it's going to be kind of tough, but I think it's going to be okay overall. I don't think it's going to be that great.
Yeah, I agree. And then for the linebackers that aren't edge, you also have Deion Jones, who's another, face of the franchise for Atlanta. Very good player. Maybe one of the best, if not the best, coverage linebacker in the league. You also have Forsade Oakland, who is he's a safety and linebacker. I'm putting him in linebacker here because I think that's where he'll end up getting more of his snaps. But he's kind of one of those guys who can do either one. Doesn't really fit a box. They also have Deion Buchanan, who maybe can be a depth guy. I think this is going to be I think this is a solid linebacking group, largely because of how much Deion Jones brings to it. I'm giving them a 7 out of 10 here.
Yeah, I think that this is, you mentioned Jones' ability in coverage. I think it's going to be interesting to see this team, these linebackers in coverage, because I think they're all very athletic. You mentioned Olakun, is that how it's said?
Yes.
Yeah, kind of being that linebacker safety hybrid. Buchanan was kind of that linebacker safety hybrid at Arizona as well. They have two very similar guys. I think that they're going to be very athletic on that side, especially, like you said, in coverage. I think they're going to be very good. So, yeah, I think this linebacker group is probably the strongest part of this defense.
Yeah, and we'll move on to I think the interior defensive line is stronger, but we'll move on to one of the best parts of their defense to the worst part of their defense, the secondary. You have A.J. Terrell. They drafted him in the first round to try and fix that problem, but again, rookie cornerbacks very rarely are great their first season. You have Isaiah Oliver, who hasn't been great, but a lot of people blame the coaching for that. So, but at the same time, it's going to be the same coach. So, yeah, you can't really get too much about that. You also have Kendall Sheffield, who was a 4th rounder last year. Played all right. Wasn't bad. And then for safeties, Keanu O'Neal, of course, very good. And then you have DeMonte Kazi, who really his stats are, in my opinion, his stats kind of are better than his tape. I think he's sort of mediocre, even though he has had some good statistical seasons. I think the secondary, again, it's not great. Really, they need A.J. Terrell to immediately be like a number 1 guy. I just can't see that happening his first season. I think the secondary gets a 3.
Yeah, and I mean, I even thought Terrell was a little bit of a reach there at cornerback at the position they drafted him. I thought I would have taken a couple of guys ahead of him, but regardless, that's the guy they got. That's the guy they're hoping to be good. We'll see what happens. Like you said, corners are a very tough position to take on, especially – we mentioned some of the guys in this division at that receiver spot that he's going to have to take on week in and week out. That's going to be really hard. Neal, 4 games in the last 2 years, I think is a problem. Let's see if he can get healthy and be, back to the level he is. He's still obviously only 24 in his first 2 years. He was one of the best safeties in the league. So obviously let's see if he can get back to that. Kazi is a big boomer bust guy. He does have 10 interceptions in the last 2 years, but I think he takes a lot of chances back there at safety. So, I mean, I think it's kind of like you said, kind of a mediocre secondary overall. If Neal's healthy, he probably makes his secondary really, solid enough at least. But I think there's too many young variables to this that are inexperienced players.
Yeah, agreed. So with that, it gives the Falcons a final score that puts them at the number 9 team in the NFC. Spoiler alert, the Saints and Bucks both finish ahead of the Falcons. So if a 6.2 puts them at number 9, just behind the Eagles and Cowboys, which would mean that they would be, 2 spots out of a wild card spot, which kind of feels right for me. This feels like maybe a 7 and 10 team, I think.
Yeah, the question is going to be, is this team going to be good enough to keep Dan Quinn around? I think no. I think that this is probably a 6 and 10 year for them, where then Quinn sees himself out, and then I could easily see a new regime coming into this building in Atlanta, and then making this team really good again. Not back to their Super Bowl level where they were, that close to winning the Super Bowl, a few years ago, but I think that they can make them back to a competitor in this division with 2 of the top teams in this division, as we're going to talk about. But I think that there needs to be a change before that happens.
Yes, I'm with you. And let's just get into now those top 2 teams. So you could argue either way here. My initial, before the Jamal Adams thing broke, I was going to introduce you as someone who I can't win against, because either if I pick the Bucks to be a better team, you're going to say I'm a homer, and if I pick the Saints, I'm reverse jinxing. So there's no winning from my spot here. But I'd like to know what you think. Who do you have as the number 2 team in the NFC South?
I went back and forth on this. I'm just going to do it. I think that they're going to be better. I'm going to pick the Saints to finish second.
Oh.
Yeah, I just like too much of the talent on the Buccaneers overall on all sides of the ball. I think that they're just going to be really good. Not taking away from the Saints. The Saints are probably going to be, if my prediction rolls true, the Saints could be a 12-4, 11-5 wild card team in my eyes. I just think these two teams are that good. Like I said, I think they're both easily Super Bowl contenders. They're two of my 5 Super Bowl contenders out of the NFC. But I'm going to go with the Saints at number 2, just based on I think that the Buccaneers got extremely better, not just with Brady at quarterback. I think they got way better overall in that team, and I think that they're going to win the division next season. So I'll go with Saints at 2.
Okay, so the Saints are a loaded team, and I think going through this rankings really just shows how loaded this team is and how many there is no weakness to this team, and there is a lot of strength. And we'll start things off at the top. The two most important positions, two most important
10
rankings. 10. Well, Sean Payton gets a 9 because it was, I believe I had Bill Belichick, Andy Reid, and then it was Mike Tomlin, who I had as the top 3. I think I gave Peyton 5. The only number 5 overall. The only reason he fell down a little bit is he's had some suspect leadership moments throughout the course of his career. But in terms of X's and O's, he is just one of the best to ever do it. He gets a 9. Breeze also fell down to a 9. However, I am going to raise them up a point due to Jameis Winston being their backup, who I think he wouldn't be a 1 if he was a starting quarterback, I think. So, I think he's probably a top 25 quarterback in the league. Getting him as your backup is great. I am not including Taysom Hill in the quarterbacks. I have him included later on. But 10 for the quarterback room, 9 for head coach, gives them a 19 out of 20 overall for the two most important slots. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. This has been one of the best quarterback coach combinations in the league for 12 years, 10 years, however long it's been. It's felt like forever. These two have obviously...
It really has. It's felt like forever, Kyle. Trust me. It's
yeah.
And any day now.
These two are one and the same wavelength. Obviously, this offense has been, transcendent for multiple years because of what these two can do. I'm with you on that. They're that good.
Yeah. And then we'll get on to offensive line. Doesn't get much worse here. You have Eric McCoy, who was, maybe the best offensive lineman rookie last year. You have Andres Pete, who is solid. They just drafted Cesar Ruiz. He probably will play guard. I think he should be good. He should be solid. And for tackles, Ryan Ramczyk, Terron Armstead. This is an easy 10 for me. Maybe the best offensive line in football.
So let's individually rank here. I know it's hard to compare positions. Is Ryan Ramczyk the best player in the NFC South?
Well, let me just think about it for a second. So if it would probably be, I think Julio Jones would be in the conversation. I think let's see, for Tampa Bay, I don't think they have some. Maybe you want to say Levante David. I think that Ramczyk is better. I don't think he would be in there. And then for the Panthers, I don't think they have anybody. You could have argued Kuechly, but he's retired. I would say yes.
Yeah, I think he's the best player in the entire division. I think he's that good of a tackle. He's been great since he's come out from Wisconsin, which just, breeds offensive linemen. The big question, of course, you have for the Saints on this offensive line is putting that rookie in there week 1. But, of course, he's sitting between a guy you mentioned who was probably the best center in the league as a rookie last year in McCoy. And, of course, Ramczyk, who we just said is the best player in the division overall. So I think that there's not too much to worry about. This is a really good offensive line.
Yeah, I agree. And from that, we can move on to the receiving core. Receiving core seems very good. You have Michael Thomas, of course, who was the best receiver in football last year, at least statistically. And I think just in general, last year, he was the best in the league. They brought in Emmanuel Sanders, who could be that number 2 receiver they've been looking for quite some time. This is where I'm including Taysom Hill because he gets the majority of his snaps as lined up as a receiver. I think I would, if I had to put him in one group, I'm putting him as a receiver. They also have Traquan Smith. The receiving core gets an 8 here. I think this is a good receiving core, especially with the addition of Sanders, who I suspect, he was very good last year. I suspect him to still be good this year, although he is getting a bit up there.
Yeah, I think Sanders is good until he stops being good. That's just kind of the way he is. He came off a torn ACL, or was it Achilles? One of those 2 injuries, and he didn't really even miss a beat then. And then Smith was a guy who was kind of playing up as a number 2 receiver, and I don't think he was great, but he made a lot of big plays. It just seemed like every time they needed a big play, Breeze found him down the field or something like that. And now he's going to be probably in his position as a number 3 receiver where he's going to be very good. I do think that this receiving core has a lot of talent. One of the things I haven't liked about this offseason, we haven't talked about this yet, the Michael Thomas slander that's going on NFL Twitter. Can we just knock that off right now? I don't know what this whole thing is because he doesn't run down the field that people don't like Michael Thomas. Mm-hmm. The fact that he can get open literally every play, it doesn't matter that he doesn't run 20 yards down the field. Michael Thomas is one of the best 3 receivers in football. I don't care what anybody says. He's that good of a route runner. He's literally open every time Breeze needs him, and he catches everything. He's a top 3 receiver, and the slander needs to stop. That's all I got to say about that.
So top 3. So do you have like Evans, Godwin, then Thomas, or is it like Thomas, Godwin, then Evans, or which one of those is that?
It's definitely Jones, Hopkins, and Thomas for me, and then obviously I think those 2 are probably in the top 6. I don't know how I would rank it after that, but Michael Thomas is top 3 receiver in the league. This whole slander that happened from the Devontae Parker thing because he doesn't run down the field needs to stop. Just cut it out.
Yeah, no. Billy on this channel made a great video sitting at, I think, like 130,000 views now on that whole situation. So check that one out if you haven't already. We'll move on to the backs. The one thing that worries me about Kamara is the fact that I do feel like when he came back from his injury, he didn't look totally right. Maybe I'm just a little bit worried because we just saw Gurley fall off a cliff after that happened, but it's a little bit of a worry. They also have Latavius Murray and Ty Montgomery. I'm giving the backs an 8 here.
I think that's fair. I think that, it was kind of a regression for Kamara last year. And, obviously his strength is how dynamic he is on both, catching the ball and running the ball. But, for a guy who was regarded as potentially one of the best running backs in football, he still hasn't hit 1,000 yards for a season. And I think that's something that's kind of shocking and, something that we kind of need to see. I think that one thing that we did notice that Latavius Murray is not Mark Ingram. He's not that good. And I felt like there was a big drop-off between Murray and Ingram and how that changed. But, this offense was still really good despite that. Obviously, it's not predicated on running the ball really well, but it's something that really helps when you have that downhill runner who's as good as Mark Ingram. And I think that's something they missed.
Yeah. Also, I would mention Ty Montgomery. I have him in the backs. He might end up being a receiver for them. I'm not really sure, but I just put he's not moving the needle anyway, so I sort of threw him in there. And for tight ends to round out the offense, I'm giving them a 6. It's Jared Cook and Josh Hill. Both are, I think, very good tight ends. I don't think either of them are necessarily exceptional. Cook is definitely getting up there, but he is a Pro Bowl tight end in his own right. They get a 6, bringing this offense to an 8.4, which is the best offense in the NFC so far.
Yeah, I think, Cook is kind of like in that Sanders boat for me that, he's good until he's no longer good to me. He's just been around for so long. He's been that good for that many years. Anyone ask for anybody with expectations for Adam Trotman, maybe wait a couple years. Tight ends typically aren't good out of the gate. We've talked about that a few times already. He's going to have a few years until he's actually probably playing a lot and is any good. But they have a good tight end core overall. And, this offense has always been good. It's one of the best offenses in the league. It has been for, like we talked about, forever, as you probably know as a Bucs fan. I guess maybe the one question you have is, all of a sudden, you're relying on guys like Breeze, Sanders, and Jared Cook, who are all on the wrong side of 30. And, we saw with guys like Phillip Rivers last year that cliff can come sooner than you think. But I think that's the least of their worries overall. I don't think that they're not going to be that worried about that. I think all these guys are still going to be productive players this next season, and this is going to be a very good offense again.
Yeah, that's my only hope as a Bucs fan. It's just some of these older guys that do fall off the cliff. But I don't know. I don't know if it's hopeful thinking for me, I suppose. We'll move on to the defense. For edge rushers, you have Cam Jordan, who you could have Cam Jordan and a Pringles can on the other side, and this is probably getting a 10 for edge rushers with how good he is. But they don't have a Pringles can. They instead have Marcus Davenport, who is good. I think they overpaid for him a bit in the draft, to say the least, to go up and get him. They essentially used 2 first-round picks to get Davenport, which doesn't look great in hindsight, but he's still good. And I give the edge a 10 largely because of Jordan. And for the interior defensive line, You have Sheldon Rankins, who is very good, Malcolm Brown, who I think is serviceable, and Mario Edwards Jr., who I think is also serviceable, and he's kind of a good pass rush guy from the inside. I think the interior line is largely due to Rankins, is a good one as well. I'm giving it a 7, giving the defensive line a 17 out of 20 overall.
Yeah, I think Cameron Jordan's, he's probably just outside that defensive player of the year level, but he's still one of the best pass rushers in the league. I think he's going to be great again this next season. This defensive line's always been pretty good when he's been on the line. So I agree with all that. I think they're going to be very good again this next season.
Okay, and we'll just go right from there to linebackers that aren't edge. You have Demario Davis, who was a first-team All-Pro last year, so they have starting off strong. Kiko Alonso, who's been kind of a middling player for most of his career, maybe sometimes not even that, but he looks good in New Orleans, and it was just in 300 snaps, but he did look good, and they do kind of have a tendency to, get some of these guys to sort of become better when they get to New Orleans, when they get to that kind of system. I also have Zach Bond. I'm giving the linebacking group a 7 here.
I think that's fair. I think Alonso is always a guy that looks great, his intangibles, why? Because he's always been pretty athletic. He looks better on paper than probably what he actually puts out on the field. Mm-hmm. But, obviously pairing with a guy like Davis and how good Zach Bond could be. Otherwise, it's going to be Alex Anzalone, who has great hair. Not much else I can really say about him. But, I mean, I think that there's going to be an athletic group. I think that was the big thing with Bond and getting a guy like that as well, is that he can be really good. He is very, very athletic on that outside linebacking spot. We'll see how it goes. I'm not a big Kiko Alonso guy, as I just mentioned, but Davis is a game changer at that position.
Yeah, agreed. And then we'll move on to the secondary, the last part of this defense. You have Marshawn Lattimore, who's obviously a number 1 lockdown corner. The number 2 spot is a bit up in the air. It's either going to be PJ Williams or Janoris Jenkins. I would feel much better about either one of them being a number 3 than a number 2. But I think that they both probably can fill in at number 2 from time to time. I think PJ will probably be the guy who's more often than not being the number 2 guy. And then for the safeties, you have Malcolm Jenkins and Marcus Williams, 2 very good safeties. I think that they have one slight problem, so I can't give them a 10, but still a very good secondary. It gets a 9 for me, which brings their defense up to an 8.3 overall, which is going to put them currently as the second best defense behind the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lattimore is the kind of guy that can make up for a lot of bad corners at number 2 because he's going to take up so much space on that. He's going to be on an island, I think, on that one side. He's a lockdown guy, like you mentioned. Jenkins was very bad last year, but, perhaps he gets better. Obviously, with New Orleans, you mentioned that a lot of guys get better in this system. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, bringing back Malcolm Jenkins, that's the big one. He is 32, but he has always been pretty good at the position, so obviously they're not going to be too worried. There's going to be a good defense. I mean, there's not much you can say about the Saints that they're going to be bad at. I think they're going to be good at every position. But like I said, I just like the team ahead of them more. I think that this is going to be a really good team once again. We'll see what happens if they can get past their playoff woes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the really fate, or karma, I guess, whatever you want to call it. The universe is the real thing standing in the way of New Orleans right now. So that gives them a total of 8.5. Great score. I mean, again, this is the kind of thing where this ranking favors the Saints so much because it's about sort of how good of an all-around team are you. And since they are, again, they're that all-around team, that gives them a score of 8.5. The most recent leader was the 49ers, who had a 7.7. So almost a full point ahead of the second place team. Just a really good team, and I wish they weren't in the division of my favorite team because I think they're going to be very good. The one way it can be bad would just be if Breeze falls off a cliff. But I honestly think this is the playoff team with Jameis Winston. Like, I think they're that good.
Yeah, and then the thing I talked about with Bridgewater is quarterbacks just tend to be good in that system, I think, and I think it definitely caters to a quarterback who's just I think he's going to be very good no matter who's behind center because it's so quarterback friendly, that offense. And I think, if Winston does get an opportunity to play, whether Hopefully nothing happens to Breeze. I don't want Breeze to get hurt, obviously. But if Winston has to step in
Yeah,
and play,
don't
I
want
think
that to happen.
yeah.
Definitely not.
I think Winston would be just fine. I don't think he'd have as many turnovers in that system as he would in Tampa Bay or did in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, hard to have as many. I mean, that was if you're trying, it's going to be difficult. We can just move on now. We'll go to everyone's favorite team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Why are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to win the NFC South?
Because they had the best offseason in the league. I think that they got better on that offensive line, which was a definitive weakness. They, I think, addressed the running back position very well, and a guy I thought was really good. His numbers weren't awesome. He didn't, blow you away like some of those guys that were at the top of the draft, but he was on a Vanderbilt team that was very bad, and he put up good numbers in the SEC despite a really bad team. I can't stress enough how bad Vanderbilt was for anybody who didn't watch college football. They were abysmal to watch, and they played in the SEC, and he still played really well. I think he is going to take the running back position. They improved the offensive line, brought in a guy like Tristan Wirfs, who I think is going to be really good. They have 2 of the top 6 receivers in football already. They, you can question whatever you want about Tom Brady, but at the very least, I can guarantee you, I'm willing to bet anything that I have, which isn't much, but I'm willing to bet it, that Tom Brady will not have 42 turnovers in 16 games this next season. I'm willing to bet that, so that's going to be an improvement on that end. And they already had a great pass rush, and I think this team, like I said, I think they're the biggest winners of the offseason, and that's going to put them in a position to win the division.
Yeah, I think that people will counter that by saying they would bet that Brady's also not going to throw for 5,100 yards this next season as well. But it seems like it will still be an upgrade. Let's talk about Brady and Arians. Tom Brady gets an 8 right here. Again, the age, and he's not coming off of his best season, so that factors in. How much of it was the receiving core? I think some, but not all. I also think that you have Bruce Arians here as the head coach. He's getting a 6. He fell down a little bit. Not a terrible score, but I believe he was like the top guy who still got a 6, if I remember correctly. Feels kind of wrong. I feel like he should get a 7, but he gets a 6 because of where he landed. I think the main reason why we had him fall down was, at least why I was sort of down on him, is his refusal to go to advanced statistics and analytics, despite the fact that it's clearly the correct decision to do so. He's made some questionable game management decisions. However, I think his leadership is unquestionable, and he's a very good X's and O's guy as well.
Yeah, it does seem weird that he's so, wants to act like he is in 2005 with some of his, thinking as far as football goes. But his vertical passing offense has still been one of the trademarks of the NFL, I think, for the past couple seasons. I think he's that good at it. So, I mean, the question is going to be, what is Brady's expectations this season? For his down year last year, it was 4,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, which what I thought, because Edelman played hurt most of the year, was probably the worst receiving core in football because he played hurt. He had a rookie that started the season hurt and didn't get any practice reps through training camp. He had a guy, his number one option for a lot of times was Jacoby Myers, who was an undrafted free agent. I think that it's reasonable to expect 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 picks. And that's a very good quarterback. I think that's probably what he's going to put up this season. And that's why I'd probably have him at a 9. I understand the 8 based on the quarterback rankings. I think he's going to be very good this year. I think he's going to bounce back. I think a lot of that had to do with a team that I thought was, like I said, the worst receiving core because Edelman was playing hurt, a team that was the worst red zone offense because nobody could get open. I think a lot of this gets better this next season. Brady bounces back.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's also the flip side is that quarterbacks historically throw a ton of interceptions in their first year with Bruce Arians. There could be something to that, although I think part of the flip side is going to be that the rest of the Bucs team, for the most part, has now played in this system and won't be making those mistakes. There's a lot of option routes. Those receivers won't be making those mistakes. And, usually you're not 43 when you're joining the system, so he might be able to pick it up quicker. The quarterbacks that ended up being ahead of him were Mahomes, Wilson, Jackson, Breeze, Rodgers, Ryan, Watson, and Stafford. Those were the ones I had ahead of him, which is why he gets the 8. So he would have had to jump a few of those guys to get a 9. But yeah, we'll move on to, let's go to the offensive line. You have Ryan Jensen as a center, who's getting paid a good amount, but he's still very good. You have Ali Marpet, who is one of the more underrated guards in the league. Alex Kappa is probably the weak spot of this offensive line. You also have Tristan Wirfs, their first rounder, who should be an immediate fit right there and someone who can play very well. There's also Donovan Smith, who he's the most unathletic person I've ever seen in my life, but he will, when he gets beat, he looks terrible, but he's actually not as bad as you would think when you just, watch the most memorable plays. He gets the job done more often than not. I think this is an offensive line with three good pieces with Wirfs, Marpet, Jensen. Smith is mediocre. Kappa, I don't love. So I'm giving this offensive line a 7.
I think that's fair. I think it's probably close to mid-tier, maybe a little above mid-tier, which, that 7 would fit. A guy like Jensen was obviously very good. And then I think Wirfs is, incredible athletically. And his numbers in college spoke for themselves for how good he was pass blocking. So I think it's a really good fit for him playing that right tackle position. I think he's going to fill that hole for the next decade for them. I think he was that good of a prospect. I think that they addressed their need immediately, offensive tackle. They obviously could have looked running back there, but that was an important need, especially when you're taking on a 43-year-old quarterback. It makes a lot of sense. I think that they're going to be good enough next year. I think they're going to be just fine. Overall, I think that this offensive line is going to be good enough. And, you don't have to block a lot with Brady and how quick he releases the ball. Obviously, Arians' offense likes to throw the ball downfield a whole lot, but I think that they're going to make some adjustments. I think it's going to be kind of catering a lot to what Brady's skill set is. And, the ball's not going to stay in his hands very long. So I think overall they're going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think so too. I think one of the big reasons that, you have someone like Wirfs going when he did was simply because he is a they needed a tackle. They didn't have a right tackle on their roster. So getting him, they also have Joe Hag, who I should have mentioned earlier. He's someone who can play any position on the offensive line. So if someone does go down, they now have someone who can easily fill in. He was sort of the 6th man for Indianapolis. He should be a 6th man for the Bucs as well. I like their O-line. And then I really like their receiving core. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They drafted Tyler Johnson, who I think is kind of a steal in the 5th round. Scotty Miller and Justin Watson can both be number 3 guys, certainly number 4 and 5 guys. This is a 10 for me. I think it's hard to argue the contrary.
Yeah, I mean, we have 2 receivers probably in the top 6 in the league. You're going to have a good receiving core ranking. These 2 guys are game changers. And big bodies for the throw to down the field too. I think this is a special receiving core. And it's pretty obvious to see why Brady went to Tampa Bay. It was to play with these 2 guys. It was, you could say, playing in Florida is nice, all that kind of stuff. It was to play with these 2 guys. He was frustrated that the Patriots refused to invest in any weapons around him. So he went to a place where they invested in weapons. He has 2 of the best receivers in football. He's going to take advantage of that this next season. These guys are great.
Yeah, agreed. And again, I feel like, everyone talks about Evans and Godwin. I think they have a full receiving core too. I just think that obviously there's going to be a drop off when you have 2 elite guys, in my opinion. Move on to the backs. Backs is interesting. Keyshawn Vaughn is the real wild card here. He was a 3rd round pick. If he can end, sometimes 3rd round picks, halfbacks really can be effective. I mean, halfbacks in general, they can burst onto the scenes right away. Ronald Jones, who they also have, did not do that. His rookie season, he got I believe it was about 25 snaps. He barely even got any playing time, and he was healthy the whole year. He was a 2nd round pick. Showed more flashes last year, but still not someone you'd want as number 1 guy. They also have Dare Ogunbowale, something like that.
I know Dare Ogunbowale.
Yeah, that's it. I know how to say it. My mouth was not letting it come out. So I'm going to give the backs a 4. I think that it's really going to depend a lot on how well Vaughn does, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that he takes over the job, like I mentioned at the start. I think he was good. Overall, at Vanderbilt, which was a very bad team and a very difficult conference, and I think that it's going to translate well to the NFL. I think he'll take over the bulk of that at the as far as the carries go. And then I think Ogunbowale is actually I watch a lot of Wisconsin football. So that's the only reason I know how to pronounce his name. But I really liked him coming into the NFL as a receiving back and potentially special teams player. And I think this is a perfect position for him, for a guy like Brady, who uses receiving running back so well. I think he's going to fill into that third down running back role really well because he is such a good receiver. He's shifty. He reminds me a lot of James White, another Wisconsin running back. And I think he's going to fill that role well there for Brady.
Yes, Agumba Wale is someone that yeah, he's someone that I think I was going to imagine good third down back, not really much else, but he's solid. We'll move on to the tight ends here. Tight ends is a highly talked about position grouping. You could argue that the best one next year might end up being the one who's talked about the least amount, and that is Cameron Brate. Not the best blocker, but really good receiving tight end. You do kind of wonder how much of that was his chemistry with Winston. They had great chemistry together, so that could be part of it. But it's still hard to imagine him not having success with Brady. You have OJ Howard, ton of potential, just a mammoth of a human. I mean, he's just one of those guys that you look at, and when you look at him next to other football players, you're just shocked about how, he's 6'6" and looks, is still as built as anybody. And then, there's the Rob Gronkowski guy. I think he will be able to. It's hard to imagine him not having any success with Tampa Bay. How much value will he bring? It's hard to say. Gronkowski was the best blocking tight end in football his last year in New England, and he's still not that old. Maybe a year off would actually be better for him. I'm giving this group an 8 right here because I think that there's a lot of potential, and it's hard to imagine it doesn't do great, but I still don't know if it's going to be top tier, so it's getting an 8.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing with Gronkowski, one of the things I feel about, for someone who watched him a lot and had paid attention to a lot of him post-career too, he seemed to slim down a lot in his retirement, which makes a lot of sense. But obviously the question is going to be, how does he bulk back up, especially as far as a blocker? But I think one of the crazy things that was about, this whole OJ Howard situation, everyone was so quick was, oh, well, he's going to be traded now. This guy's still a very good blocking tight end, in my opinion, because of that size that he has and his athletic ability. I still have a lot of stock in him that he figures it out as a receiver as well. And then, of course, Brate's going to be that catching tight end. That's 5 really good targets. And then you're not even getting into guys like you mentioned in Tyler Johnson and Scotty Miller. I think that this tight end group is going to be very good. I think that, Rob Gronkowski is going to be on a pitch count. For a little baseball reference there for you folks, I think he's going to be limited in his snaps. He's going to be limited overall. But, games 1 through 16 is not where Rob Gronkowski was brought into this team. Games 17 through 19, as they build towards the Super Bowl, is going to be where Rob Gronkowski is going to be brought in. I could see him putting up a season where it's like, oh, well, he didn't really have anything left, but he only had like 400 yards this season, and then he has a monster playoffs. I think that they're going to gear him up, work him. He's going to work in shape throughout the offseason, through some of the regular season, and I think to the back half of the regular season in the playoffs, I think he's going to be really good for them. I think this tight end group's really good and really dynamic.
Yeah, I think all good stuff there. So with that, the offense for Tampa Bay, it's a 7.4, which ends up being tied with the 49ers for 4th best offense in the NFC. And then we can move on to the defense. We'll start with the edge rushers. You have Shaq Barrett and JPP. If these guys are both what's that?
Oh, no, I said 10.
Oh, well, I'm actually giving it a 9 because the only reason is because I think there's worries. I think we'll have to see JPP. He can't stay healthy unless when he's on a football field. So we'll have to, on a football field, he's fine. But off the football field is when he has problems. So we'll have to worry about that. I also think Barrett, could there be some aggression? Yes, there could. I think there's enough question marks for me to say this isn't a definitive 10, but I am going to give it a 9 here. And you clearly disagree. You thought it should be a 10. Why do you say that?
I mean, I just think Barrett proved that he's that good. I think even if there's regression, if he falls from 19.5 sacks to 15 sacks, and then JPP is just good, obviously you hope he stays healthy. That's going to be the big thing. But I think he's talented enough to where he's on the field. That pairing is going to be one of the best in the league. I think that they're going to rack up 25 sacks between the two of them.
Yeah, and also it's not just totally health with JPP. He's 31 now, getting up there. Again, I think that they're going to be great. A 9 is a very good score. I'm a little concerned, so I give him a 9 instead of 10. We'll go into the interior defensive line, and I debated between 9 and 10. I decided to go with 9. We'll go to the interior defensive line. Vita Vea, maybe the best just pure nose tackle in the NFL. You also have Sue, who is very good, although, again, another guy getting up there in age. William Goldson, I think, played very well as the other defensive end. Remember, they play a 3-4 as opposed to a 4-3, so they need 3 guys in that interior D line. But again, if maybe they had a better third option than Goldson, I would probably give it a 10. But he's still really good. They're getting a 9 here again because of Sue's age, and Goldson is, I think, good, not great.
The whole switcheroo for me still blows my mind where they got rid of McCoy and brought in the other guy from that draft and Sue. It's still crazy to me, but Sue's obviously very good. And when his head's in it, he's obviously still one of the best interior pass rushers or interior defensive linemen, I think, in the league. Despite the age, I think that they're going to be very good on this side of the ball, especially this front seven. I love this front seven. I think this front seven is going to be awesome as we get into the linebackers also. But I think this group's also, that's probably a 9.5 even for me because I think this group's that good.
Yeah, I mean, I legitimately for a second thought about going 10-10-10 right here. I ended up going 9 for the first 2. The third, you can't talk me out of a 10 on this one. Lavonte David, Devin White, the rookie, who had a very good rookie season, and even Kevin Minter, who again 3-4, so only 2 middle linebackers, but he's a starting level middle linebacker who's stuck as a third guy right now. This is a great linebacking core. David, one of the most underrated players in football. This is a 10 for me.
Yeah, no doubt. Obviously, Lavonte David, you mentioned is potentially one of the top players in the division. I think he's behind guys like Ramczyk and Jones, but I think he's one of the top 5 or 6 players in football or in the entire division. God, I can't talk today. One of the top 5 or 6 players in the division, Lavonte David. I think he's that good. And then I love Devin White coming out of college. He was so fun to watch at LSU, and the way he could cover ground at that middle linebacker spot. And if he wasn't a middle linebacker, he was an edge rusher, and putting up those kind of numbers, he would have been a number 1 overall pick. But he moved down to 5, all the way down to 5 because of that. But obviously, middle linebacker is not the premium position, but I still love watching him play. I think he's that good. He's going to be the next great middle linebacker in my book.
Yeah, and I've been a little bit more lukewarm on White. I thought Bush was the better player coming out of the draft. I kind of still think Bush is the better player. I think he's been doing really good with Pittsburgh, but I really like White. White's been great, and it helps when you're playing next to a guy who, in my opinion, should be a surefire Hall of Famer. And the only reason he might not get in is because he's been playing for Tampa Bay and Lavonte David. I mean, he's been right up there with Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly, but. Him being an outside linebacker in a 4-3 for so many years, that's kind of also hurt him. But let's move on to the secondary. It's my favorite thing. It's like a drinking game when you watch like national media. Is every time they say young secondary, but don't actually bring up any players because that's kind of they're just the young secondary. That's what they are, which of course I get. But let's get into them. For cornerbacks, you have Carlton Davis, who's their best man guy. He has at times looked very good in man coverage. Not always perfect, but you also have Sean Murphy Bunting, who has definitely had some flashes. Seems to be a really good number 2 guy. He obviously had a game-sealing pick 6 against Detroit. He's been very good, I think. And then Jamel Dean, who's been one of the most interesting players, rookies last year. I mean, he came in, got beat against Seattle. I thought it was a little bit overblown, but the fans were not happy with him. They were calling him a bust right away. And from that point on, he ended up being one of I think Pro Football Focus had from the next game through the rest of the season, he was a top-rated corner in football. So he definitely had bounced back in a big way and is a big play guy. If I remember correctly, he was one of the top in pass deflections, and so was Davis. So those guys both can get their hands on the football. For safeties, there's a bit more of a question mark. Antoine Winfield, I think, is going to be very good. And I think he actually is a player who could end up being good as a rookie in the secondary, even though I think safety, it's easier to do it than cornerback. I also think Mike Edwards showed some flashes as a 4th-round rookie last year. Jordan Whitehead, I wouldn't feel great about Jordan Whitehead being a starter, but as a number 3 guy, I think could be fine. The wild card as well is Justin Evans, who at times has looked great, but the problem is that he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He missed all of last season due to an injury. We don't know if he'll be back. If he is, that would be great. We just don't know. A lot of question marks for the safety. A lot of question marks for the secondary. I'm going to give the secondary a 7 because I could see this being a great secondary. I could see this being a not great secondary. I think 7 feels right for me. What do you think about that?
I thought you were actually going to go lower based on your explanation. I was thinking 6 or 5, and I was going to bump it a little bit because I do like Carlton Davis so much. I think he's actually really good shutdown. I think he's building towards being that really good shutdown corner, potentially, long-time number 1 guy. This is a young secondary. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I really like Davis, and I think Murphy Bunton next to him is going to be, a pretty good duo. This secondary I thought got a lot better. I'm sure you've talked about it a lot. Once Hargreaves left the team, this team really stepped up in the secondary position and got a lot better. And I think that's going to be a big thing. And I mentioned multiple times about Antoine Winfield Jr. I think that this is one thing that I think that we continue to overreact upon with young secondary prospects and just draft prospects in general. Guys who are just good football players but don't stand out athletically. This was the same thing with Tyrann Mathieu. Antoine Winfield just made plays. He got the ball a lot on the defensive side of the ball. He created a lot of turnovers. I'm not saying he's going to be Tyrann Mathieu going forward, but it's a very similar skill set, I think, an underside safety who just continues to make big play after big play. And now he's going to be on the Tampa Bay defense, and I think he's going to be a very good player for many, many years because of just his ability to be a playmaker back there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was trying to figure out how I could. I'll just move. I'll just say it. This puts the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the number 2 overall team, just behind the Saints, who were the number 1 right beforehand. Oh, here I was gonna just put it on the screen. My overall rankings. I put them here, so let's see if I can get.
We get it.
Okay, so we're back here now. So what happened was I tried to show a Word document where I have all of everything listed, so I could just show that on screen. Apparently, Word completely crashes this stream, so we can't do that, unfortunately. But I will just read everything off. So we'll go with this. Is I figured at the end we finished the NFC, so I figured all this read off where each of the teams ranked in the NFC. So obviously 1 through 16. For offense, Saints was 1, Vikings 2, Cowboys 3. The 49ers and Bucks tied for 4th. Falcons got 6th. Packers and Eagles tied for 7th. Then you have the Lions, Giants, Seahawks, Rams, which is kind of low at 12, it feels like. 13 Cardinals, 14 Panthers, 15 football team, and 16 the Bears. With the Bears, by the way, also the worst ranking on any of this, 2.8 for the offense. Not great. For the defense, the Bucks finished top of the list at 8.8. You have the Bears number 2 at 8.6, Saints 3, 49ers 4, 5 Seahawks, 6 Cowboys, Packers and Lions tied for 7th. You then had the Vikings followed by a 3-way tie for 10th with the Falcons, Rams, and football team. Then you have the Eagles, Cardinals, and Giants tied for 14th, and Panthers at the worst defense in the NFC. And then overall, which I think is the most interesting, overall you have the Saints, Bucks, 49ers, Vikings, Seahawks, Packers, Cowboys, Eagles, Falcons, Rams, Lions, Giants, Bears, and Cardinals tied, and then the Panthers followed by the football team. So Washington football team rounding it out, Panthers. This would mean that if this thing holds, the overall playoffs for the NFC would be Saints at the 1 seed, 49ers 2 seed, Vikings 3 seed, your Dallas Cowboys the number 4 seed, with the 3 wildcard teams being the Bucks, Seahawks, and Packers. The Eagles and Falcons and Rams all miss out on playoffs. I think that could happen, not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just looking at my Excel sheet, which I'm not even going to try to share the screen with you right now.
Don't do it.
But I had 5 Super Bowl contenders out of the NFC, and I have 3 in the AFC. I had 5 Super Bowl contenders out of the AFC, which are the Vikings, 49ers, Saints, Bucks, Seahawks, which pretty much matches up with your ranking perfectly. And then, of course, I have the Cowboys and Packers as potential playoff teams, along with the Eagles, Bears, Cardinals, and Rams, who I think could be playoff teams. Not necessarily, obviously, they all can't be playoff teams, but I see a scenario where they do make the playoffs. But I think that just about matches everything on your rankings. I think those 5 teams are, you could talk me into the Packers also being in that position. But as we talked about in the NFC North podcast, I think they're just below. I think they're going to be a very good playoff team and potentially a good wild card team. But I see these 5 teams sitting above everybody else, particularly the Saints, Bucks, Seahawks, and 49ers.
Yeah. Well, clearly I couldn't talk you into the Packers being a championship contender because I tried to, and you still don't feel that way. So not quite. But yeah, no. So yeah, I think this is fun sort of finishing off the NFC. Do you have any final thoughts on the NFC South or the NFC as a whole?
NFC South is going to be something that everyone should tune in every week. There's a lot of good quarterback play in this division, and there's Teddy Bridgewater. Obviously you could probably avoid some of these Panther games. I think that I still think the Panthers are going to be the worst team in football. I said that kind of as the offseason began to unfold a little bit. Obviously the DC, whatever they are going to be up there too. But I think that the Panthers are going to be the worst team and potentially a number 1 pick team. But I think overall, watching the Saints, Bucks, and Falcons is going to be entertaining as hell. And I think that the NFC is going to be entertaining as hell. I think it's clearly the better conference between the two. Obviously, the Chiefs are the reigning Super Bowl champs. But I think between the 7 or 8 teams that we listed as potential playoff teams, and that doesn't even get into the Cardinals, who I think are going to be a must tune in for the NFL Sunday Ticket fans, just because I think that offense is going to be entertaining. I think this is going to be a fun conference to watch overall. I think it's clearly the better conference, and there's a lot of good teams every week.
Yeah, I'm with you. So for next week, we will then move on to the AFC. I figure we can just do this on the podcast. I don't think people will mind listening. So do you want to do it? We could just keep going in the same order we did the NFC, or we could do it let's see. So we started with the NFC East. So I think we could do it in reverse. Reverse order. So that way maybe we could finish off with your New England Patriots, sort of how we finished off the NFC with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good. So we'll go with the AFC South next week. And for anybody looking to tune into that, it's not going to be a pretty conversation from me, but it'll be interesting to see nonetheless. So we'll go with the AFC South.
Why do you say that? Why is it not going to be a good conversation for you?
A bunch of teams I just feel mad about.
Okay. Well, I know that even the Colts, I think the Colts you have strong feelings towards.
I think that they're going to be solid. We'll talk about it a lot more on the podcast in terms of,
right.
I think that they're going to be solid. I want to see a lot more out of Phillip Rivers this next year, which, who knows what we're going to see out of Phillip Rivers this next year. We'll talk about that next week, though.
All right. Well, way to sell that next week's podcast strongly, Kyle. We're going to AFC South. I don't care about any of these teams, and I'm going to be bored the whole time we're doing it. Tune in next week.
Can't wait to talk to you all about that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if for a very boring podcast next week, tune in next time. And until then, have a good one.
Peace.